a movie called Revenge 2026, which tells the story of a special forces captain who sets out to avenge his wife after she is brutally murdered. Just how intense and adrenaline-filled is this story? Let's jump right into it. The story begins with a special forces team carrying out a mission to capture a notorious arms-dealing mafia boss named Hector Luna. The operation kicks off right as Hector is conducting a weapons transaction, and the team successfully completes the mission. Following their success, the Special Forces unit receives recognition from the military. Their captain, Carlos, is given the opportunity to deliver a speech in front of military leaders and government officials attending the ceremony. During his speech, Carlos boldly vows to expose every corrupt official and military figure who has been protecting Hector Luna. He speaks fearlessly, showing no concern about the consequences of challenging powerful people. After the ceremony, a female colonel approaches Carlos to congratulate him on the successful operation. She praises his courage and determination, noting that his outspoken attitude could make him a target for dangerous individuals within the system. As a reward for the mission's success, Carlos and his team are granted leave to enjoy a vacation. The person closest to Carlos is his own aide, Miguel, who is vacationing alongside him with their wives. While staying at a hotel, Carlos excuses himself to meet Miguel, who is relaxing by the swimming pool. As they chat, the hotel's power suddenly goes out. Miguel quickly heads back to secure his wife while Carlos rushes toward his own room. When he arrives, he discovers his wife lying in a pool of blood. Suddenly, a massive man attacks Carlos. A brutal and intense fight breaks out between them. Although Carlos is beaten badly during the struggle, he eventually manages to overpower and defeat his attacker. However, sometime after the incident, it is revealed that Carlos is still alive despite being thrown from the top of the hotel. He is now being hidden in a secret location to protect him from the people who want him dead. Not long afterward, Miguel arrives to check on his captain's condition. He invites Carlos to a small cafe for a cup of coffee. After Miguel leaves, Carlos notices a traveling lottery vendor and decides to buy most of the tickets the man is selling. The next morning, while eating breakfast, Carlos comes across a newspaper announcing the winning lottery numbers. To his surprise, one of the winning numbers matches a ticket he purchased the previous day. Excited, Carlos searches for the ticket but suddenly remembers that he left it inside his jacket. He quickly returns to the cafe from the night before to ask about his missing jacket. He learns that it was accidentally left inside the taxi he had taken earlier. Without wasting any time, Carlos heads straight to the taxi station in search of the jacket containing his potentially winning lottery ticket. As Carlos arrives at the taxi station, he is briefly confronted by several taxi drivers hanging around the area. They have no idea who they're dealing with. After retrieving his jacket and checking the lottery ticket, national news suddenly breaks with a shocking announcement. The winning ticket belongs to Carlos. The jackpot is worth $1 billion, instantly turning Carlos into one of the richest men in the country. Rather than enjoying his newfound fortune, Carlos decides to use every cent of it to hunt down the people responsible for his wife's murder. Not long after claiming the prize money, Carlos meets with Miguel and invites him to join his mission of revenge. With unlimited resources now at his disposal, Carlos plans to launch a massive operation to track down everyone involved. However, Miguel refuses. Concerned about the safety of his wife and children, he chooses to stay out of the conflict. Even without Miguel's help, Carlos still has two loyal allies, Lola and Aurelio. The two are summoned to a motel room where Carlos reveals the unbelievable fortune he has just won. With that kind of money, they can buy virtually any weapon they need and fund a large-scale operation without restrictions. Wasting no time, Carlos purchases a massive warehouse to serve as their headquarters. He also acquires an arsenal of modern firearms and equipment to prepare for the war ahead. The first phase of the mission is clear: capture Hector Luna and force him to reveal everyone connected to his wife's murder. According to the information they have gathered, Hector is currently being held inside a military prison. Their first target is therefore the military base where he is being detained. Meanwhile, Aurelio arrives with a newly purchased Range Rover. Carlos had originally requested an armored vehicle, but acquiring one would take too long, so Aurelio buys the luxury SUV as a temporary substitute. With the help of two hired soldiers, Carlos and his team disguise themselves and infiltrate an event taking place inside the military base. Using his hacking skills, Aurelio manages to bypass the facility's security systems, allowing the team to gain access to the prison. Everything goes according to plan until a suspicious general begins paying close attention to their movements. The situation quickly spirals out of control. After being forced to shoot two soldiers, Carlos and his team seize Hector and escape the base, bringing him back to their headquarters for interrogation. Now tied to a chair, Hector faces Carlos, who demands the names of everyone involved in his wife's murder. Determined to get answers, Carlos resorts to the brutal interrogation methods he learned during his years in Special Forces service. Using extreme measures, he attempts to force Hector to talk. But before Hector can reveal anything important, disaster strikes. A sniper's bullet suddenly tears through the room, killing Hector instantly. At the same moment, Carlos realizes that their headquarters has been surrounded by a heavily armed force of masked mercenaries. With no other option, the team abandons the warehouse and escapes. As they flee, a truck suddenly appears on the road. Behind the wheel is the same giant man who murdered Carlos's wife. A high-speed chase erupts. The pursuit becomes increasingly intense as bullets fly and vehicles crash through obstacles. At one point, the attackers detonate a powerful C4 explosive in an attempt to destroy Carlos and his team. Surprisingly, the Range Rover manages to withstand the massive blast, allowing them to continue the chase and narrowly escape death once again. As they speed through a crowded area during the chase, Carlos comes up with a crazy idea. He tells Aurelio to throw bundles of cash out of the vehicle. And guess what happens? The people on the streets immediately rush toward the money, creating total chaos and blocking the road behind them. The distraction works perfectly, allowing Carlos and his team to finally escape their pursuers. After losing the giant assassin, they relocate to a new headquarters far away from the city. There, Lola and Aurelio inform Carlos that their military leave has officially ended. After tonight, they will be required to return to active duty and will no longer be able to help him with his revenge mission. The following morning, Miguel arrives after receiving a call from Carlos the previous night. With Lola and Aurelio back on duty, Carlos asks Miguel for one final favor. He needs someone to access the military archives and search for suspicious personnel records. At first, Miguel refuses. He understands the risks involved. However, after Carlos reminds him of their 12 years of friendship and service together, Miguel finally agrees to help. Once inside the archives, Miguel begins searching through records of rogue soldiers based on the details Carlos provided. After a lengthy search, he finally finds a match. The man's name is Juan. According to the files, Juan is one of the most ruthless soldiers on record and is identified as the man responsible for murdering Carlos's wife. Without hesitation, Miguel sends Carlos Juan's current address. But just moments after sending the information, the female colonel suddenly appears and escorts Miguel to a meeting room filled with high-ranking officials. Inside, the atmosphere quickly turns tense. The colonel reveals that she already knows about the communication between Miguel and Carlos. Even worse, she knows that Carlos is still alive. She gives Miguel an ultimatum: choose between his former captain or his military career. The film leaves the audience wondering what decision Miguel will make. Meanwhile, Carlos arrives at Juan's residence. Following the address Miguel provided, he approaches the property and is briefly confronted by an aggressive guard dog. Fortunately, the animal is still chained up. Carlos enters Juan's house through an unlocked door and begins searching for clues. Juan is nowhere to be found. However, Carlos discovers something deeply disturbing. Hidden inside the house are photographs of Miguel's wife and children. Realizing that Miguel's family may be in danger, Carlos immediately returns to headquarters. When he arrives, only Lola is there. It turns out she requested a few extra days off specifically so she could continue helping Carlos complete his mission. Not long afterward, Miguel calls Carlos and asks to meet him. He claims to have important information that cannot be discussed over the phone. The meeting is arranged at a public bathhouse. Carlos enters alone while Lola waits outside in the car. As Lola looks around the area, she notices 3 suspicious men quietly closing off all the exits. She immediately warns Carlos, but by then, it is already too late. They suddenly realize that the entire meeting is a trap. Carlos desperately searches for a way out while, outside, Lola is attacked by Juan himself. Inside the bathhouse, Carlos manages to escape through a small bathroom window. He rushes outside and finds Lola locked in a brutal fight. After a fierce struggle, Carlos manages to pull Lola away and escape, although she is wounded after being shot during the confrontation. At the very same time, Miguel is seen traveling toward the bathhouse with several soldiers loyal to the colonel. Noticing their cold and suspicious behavior, Miguel begins to sense that something is wrong. Realizing that an attack could happen at any moment, he immediately goes on high alert. After eliminating the soldiers loyal to the colonel, Miguel makes his way to the team's new headquarters. There, he finds Lola recovering from the gunshot wound she suffered during the ambush. Standing before Carlos, Miguel sincerely apologizes. He admits that he sided with the colonel and failed to realize that everything had been part of a carefully planned trap. However, there is one positive outcome. They finally know who is behind everything. The mastermind responsible for the conspiracy is none other than the female colonel herself. Later that same night, Aurelio is summoned by the colonel after submitting his resignation. He immediately becomes suspicious when he is ordered to surrender his sidearm for security reasons. Despite his concerns, Aurelio cooperates because he still doesn't fully understand why he has been called in. Once inside the colonel's office, he is accused of helping Carlos during Hector Luna's kidnapping from the military prison. The colonel offers him a deal. If he signs a confession and accepts full responsibility, she promises a peaceful resolution. But Aurelio refuses. He will not betray his captain. As a result, he pays the ultimate price. The next morning, the colonel contacts Carlos directly and informs him that Aurelio was executed during the night. Wanting to end the situation once and for all, she openly demands that Carlos surrender himself. Carlos agrees, but only on one condition. He wants Juan, the man who murdered his wife, to be present. The colonel accepts the demand. With the terms set, Carlos and Miguel head to the agreed meeting location. Meanwhile, the colonel prepares dozens of heavily armed tactical soldiers to greet them. Upon arriving, Carlos and Miguel immediately discover Aurelio's body. The sight is horrifying. Filled with even greater rage, the two men step into an elevator and head toward the upper floors. The moment the elevator doors open, chaos erupts. Wave after wave of tactical soldiers attacks them. Carlos and Miguel fight side by side, but they are eventually separated when the elevator doors suddenly close between them. Now alone, Carlos is forced to battle an endless stream of enemies by himself. No matter how hard he fights, the numbers become overwhelming. Eventually, Carlos is defeated and captured. He is dragged before the colonel and thrown at her feet. Juan sits nearby, calmly watching the scene unfold. The colonel begins torturing Carlos slowly and deliberately, enjoying the power she holds over him. Every action is meant to demonstrate her complete control over the situation. Just as Carlos is about to be executed, everything changes. Suddenly, gunfire erupts from outside. Miguel bursts into the building and opens fire on the colonel's remaining soldiers. A massive final battle begins. Carlos faces the colonel in a brutal one-on-one fight while Miguel engages Juan in a savage duel using an axe. The colonel attacks Carlos relentlessly, throwing everything she has at him. But after a vicious struggle, Carlos finally kills her, bringing a satisfying end to the woman who orchestrated the entire conspiracy. Meanwhile, Miguel continues fighting Juan. As a former elite soldier and one of the most ruthless killers alive, Juan proves to be an incredibly dangerous opponent. The battle pushes Miguel to his limits. At one point, Juan nearly kills him by choking him to death. The fight spills toward the edge of the building, creating a terrifying situation. Carlos and Juan end up hanging from the side of the structure, suspended high above the ground. Just as the situation seems hopeless, Miguel regains consciousness. Acting quickly, he secures a rope to Carlos's tactical vest, desperately trying to save his friend's life. In the end, all three men are left hanging from the side of the building. Miguel is in the worst position of all. He is forced to support the weight of two grown men at the same time while Juan desperately tries to climb back up. The strain becomes unbearable. Realizing that Miguel will die if he continues holding on, Carlos makes a heartbreaking decision. He chooses to sacrifice himself. Without hesitation, Carlos removes the tactical vest attached to the rope. And just like that, he falls. After everything he endured, after fighting through countless enemies and finally avenging his wife, Carlos gives his life to save his friend. Some time later, life begins to move on. With the colonel dead and the conspiracy exposed, Miguel is promoted and takes over her position. Meanwhile, Lola has fully recovered from her injuries and returns to active duty. The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: Carlos's sacrifice was not in vain. At one point, Miguel and Lola remember the enormous fortune Carlos won from the lottery. Even after all the expenses, they still have roughly $500 million remaining. They joke about using the money to buy 100 acres of land and start a palm plantation business. And with that, the story comes to an end. The lesson this movie tries to teach is that hatred and revenge consume precious time and energy. Those who hurt others will eventually face the consequences of their own actions. The best form of revenge is not destroying your enemies, but becoming a better version of yourself. And that's the end of today's story.